Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hoosier Homestead. My name is Alex, and I thought today would be fun to do a little bookshelf tour video to show you guys the books that we have here at our home, our humble bookshelf at home. I will preface this by saying that we do not typically buy a whole lot of books. Our our stash of books is fairly small compared to other people that I've seen who have just walls and walls filled with books. And the reason is because one, we read a lot of books on our Kindles, which this is what I'm currently reading, A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. And I checked this out from our library. So once I'm done with this, it'll go back to the library. The ebook will go back to the library. And so we check these out either by ebook on our Kindle, or we'll check them out, the physical copy from the library, and then return it, obviously. But two, the only books we typically buy are ones that we really like and we know that we will reread. That is myself, anyways. Sarah doesn't like to reread a whole lot of books, but ones that I know that I will reread, I will keep, or I will buy kind of a nicer copy just to have on hand. Or if I find something at a used book sale that I really want to read and I see a good price on it. So our library has book sales or like half price books. Usually you can get stuff for under $3, and so those are the kind of deals that we look for if we are going to buy a book. We have a lot of little free libraries around town, and so we'll swap books. We might donate a bunch and then pick up a few that we see that we like, and kind of just share that wealth of books. Um, and so typically, if we read a book and we don't plan to reread it, um, or we want to share it with someone else, we will put it in one of those little free libraries just so we're not hoarding all these books. But anyways, just wanted to run through. I thought that'd be a fun little change to show you what we have here. All of these are my wife's Nicholas Sparks books. I'm pretty sure she has every single Nicholas Sparks book, and that is because she's a huge fan and she wanted to have every single hard copy here. And she actually has. I got this one for her birthday. This is his newest one, Counting Miracles. Um, that's in there. This just came out a couple weeks ago. I can honestly say I've never read a Nicholas Sparks book. I don't really plan to read one, but that's what she likes, and so that's okay. So we'll keep having those. We'll keep those for her. We've got a lot of Christian kind of nonfiction, devotional type books up here. I will highlight this one. This is one of my favorite. This is called the Word on Fire Bible, and it's the Gospels. So it's put out by Word on Fire, which is a Catholic publisher, but it is the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it has a lot of commentary from a lot of different bishops and other um, clergymen in the Catholic Church. There's also some really interesting like paintings. It kind of goes into a little bit of like religious art um, from different time periods, and it's really just a beautiful book. Um, there's just a lot of little treasures in here. The side is I always like this gilded side. I think it's gilded or gilded, but it's one of those nice nice Bibles that I just would love to put on a coffee table or to show off. But I have read through a lot of these, so it's not like it's just a book for show. This is something that um, I do reference from time to time, and I enjoy having that, or I'm glad I have that on hand. Um, Another one I wanted to highlight is the Read Aloud Handbook, and so this is just a nonfiction. It's not necessarily a Christian. It's just nonfiction. So my wife and I read this, and then I think there's the Read Aloud Revival book, which is by a different author. But basically, this outlines why it's important to read to children, to read out loud to children. Just it goes into their auditory how their brain interprets interprets when they are read aloud, and the benefits of that in their early stages of life. And so I definitely would recommend this book to any parent with younger children that likes to read, or even if you don't like to read, it goes over why it's important to read stories to them out loud. Um, Something else up here is the 1,000 hours outside. This is, I guess, a movement, you could say, that my wife, she follows her. She has a podcast. Her name is Ginny Urich, and so her big thing is kids should spend at least 1,000 hours outside every year, and that equates to like 4 or 5 hours a day, um, which is pretty tough to do sometimes. But she goes into why, and I have not read this yet, but my wife has, and she listens to all of her podcasts. And so basically, spending all this time outside is supposed to release things in the child's brain and help them with different growth and different stages in their growth. But being outside is kind of like that natural medicine, both physically and mentally. And so she gets into a lot of that stuff. I've got some random books over here that I've gotten over the years as gifts that I plan to read at some point in time. I just have not yet. A lot of Nelson DeMille. I think these are kind of like, I don't even know what the genre is. Like um, thriller fiction, maybe? I don't know. I have heard good things, and so I do plan to read these, but just is not super high on my priority of to be read list quite yet. Over here, we've got a lot of nonfiction, memoir type of stuff. Um, we've got, my wife read both of Michelle Obama's books. I'm currently reading A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I'm listening to the audiobook. I'm about halfway through now. I listen to that to and from work. This These books over here are kind of like the ones my favorite books that I have on hand. Um, I've talked about The Stand before and Lonesome Dove. I really liked Dan Brown's Robert Langdon series. So this is Angels and Demons, which is the first one. I think this one, I kind of get them mixed up, but I think this one is when they're electing a pope. I might have that mixed up with a different story. Um, but I really liked how, and of course it's fiction, so it's historical fiction, I guess you would say. But he gets into like the underground tunnels in the Vatican and Rome and how they connect to different buildings, and it's kind of just a cool take on that. And then of course the Da Vinci Code is the second one in that series, which is probably the most well known because of the movie with Tom Hanks. Um, if you like the movie, I would definitely recommend the book because there is quite a bit more in the book there that does not happen in the movie, which I feel like is the case with any movie. I've never seen a movie that is based on a book that I thought the movie was better, except for The Shawshank Redemption. So if you've never read The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King, a lot of people don't even know it's based off of a Stephen King novel. So the book is like 90 pages long, and the movie's like 3 hours long. And so I think the movie is actually goes into much more detail, and the movie is just very good. And so that's probably the only movie that was based on a book that the movie might be better than the actual book. Here's my opinion. Um, we'll get down here. These are like more of my higher up on the to be read list, but still haven't gotten to them yet. A lot of these I actually just got recently at a library book sale. Like for instance, this one, Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald. So she was the wife of, why do I think? I was going to say F. Scott Fitzgerald, but that doesn't sound right. Is that right? I don't know. Yeah, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I don't know why I mixed that up. So I think this is a biography of her life. Just looked interesting. Um, I've got a couple David Baldacci stories here. I've only read a couple of his books, but I do kind of like that lawyer thriller fiction genre. So looking forward to those. I've got a few of those as well over here. Here I've got the stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald. These are just a collection of short stories. Sarah got this for me at a little free library, and it's got, looks like 6 or 7 little short stories. So I like these little collections because, like, this is only 500 pages, but if you got 6 stories in here, that's something you can knock out in half a day if you've got like a reading slump, which I think I'm kind of going through right now. I'm reading A Court of Wings and Ruin, and I thought I would like it a lot more than I do. It's kind of just really just not doing it for me. I like the first 2 really well, and I'm like 22% through this one, but might end up being a finish later type of thing. I don't think I'm not going to finish it. I'll just not finish it right now, if that makes sense. And I'll jump into one of these books, which is my next to be read list. And I'm trying to stick to that because lately I'll tell myself I'm going to read one of these books, and then I see something come across my Libby app or something in the library that I've got on hold, that I've had on hold for a while, and I'll finish a book, and it's like it just came available. I'm like, well, I have to read that one now. If you check out books from the library and put stuff on hold for several months, you know how I feel. But I think I'm going to commit to one of these, so I need to make that decision of what I'm going to read next. I think it's going to be The Last House on Needless Street. So this is actually, if any of you follow Books Are Sick on YouTube, I jokingly tell my wife he is my book guy because he has a lot of really good book recommendations. His name is Nick. You should check him out. But he has like a book club if you're part of his Patreon group, and this is the book that they're reading this month. In his last video, he talked about he had just finished it, and it's a little bit different than the kind of book that he typically reads. And I think it's because each chapter is like a different character, like from a different perspective. But then he's like, it doesn't make sense, but then all of a sudden it does make sense. And so it's one of those books, I think, that there's different storylines that tie together, but don't tie together until the very end. And so I kind of like those types of things. So we'll check that out next, I think. But I've got a few nonfiction here, as well as some fiction. I've never read an Emily Henry book, but I've got a couple of hers. I feel like these are books that you don't really have to think about. I don't know if I'm going to like something like this, but it's one of those books that's like you watch a Hallmark movie and you don't have to actually pay attention, but I feel like this is a good slump breaker, and hopefully I don't offend anyone by saying that likes these books, but that is my first impression. But I guess I shouldn't make that assumption until I read one of those books, and so I will read one of those this year. So I have Funny Story, and I also have Happy Place, and so I think I'm going to read Funny Story next, or Funny Story first. A few other notable mentions. I think I started this one a while ago, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, thinking that I would really like it and that it would be one of those books that I would just breeze through, and I had a really hard time even getting started with it. So I definitely plan on coming back to it because the story seems to be really interesting. It's about this woman that I think she is immortal, maybe, and she has lived for several hundred years, but nobody knows or nobody remembers her that meets her. And so I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting storyline. So we'll see. I'm going to try that again sometime soon. I also have all the George R.R. Martin, the Game of Thrones series. I plan to read that at some point. Just have not pulled the trigger on that yet. A few other ones I've got here. A lot of these are nonfiction. I need to find a spot on my bookshelf. I need to do a book purge probably soon. So that'll come later. So I can fit some of these other books on the shelf. But Just Mercy is a good one. I read this with our Works book club, and this is about the death penalty in America. And so this guy, Brian Stevenson, he's a lawyer who represents a lot of death row inmates, and he gets into like just the logistics of that whole process, and it's a really interesting inside look and his perspective on that. I think it was a movie as well. I don't know if we've seen the movie or not. Yeah, it says now a major motion picture, so we'll have to check that out if we not have not. But it is a really good book. I don't typically like a whole lot of nonfiction if it's not like a memoir type of thing, but this was pretty good. Another one that I like that was nonfiction is Evicted by Matthew Desmond. And so this guy, I think he was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he interviewed a bunch of landlords and kind of followed the process of landlords evicting people in that city, and especially in lower income areas of that city, and just the hardships that people face. And people, you get evicted once and that goes on your record, and it's hard to find another apartment or house once you've already gone through that, and it's just this slippery slope. And so he goes into the problems with evictions and a lot of like slumlords, and it's a good story. And both of these actually, I just noticed this, were on the New York Times Book Review. So this one was the top 10 best books in 2016, and this one was 100 notable books in 2014. So that ought to mean something. Of course, I've got The Stand. This is my favorite book of all time. I've mentioned this before. This is my favorite copy. My mom got me this one for Christmas one year, so thank you, Mom. It's also got the nice gilded edges. I think it's got, yeah, this little ribbon bookmark, which is kind of cool. But The Stand is this story. It's this epic about the super flu that affects the whole world. And I read this during COVID for the first time during COVID. And so it was kind of scary having those parallels. But it's about this flu that only 99.7% of the population dies from. And so the story follows the survivors of the flu and how they team up, and there's this battle of good versus evil, and they have to make their stand against the evil. And so it's a really neat story. Another chunky guy I got here is It by Stephen King. This is another one I've read and I kept because I do plan to reread this at some point. This is, if you've only seen the movie, you need to read the book, because only seeing the movie, I feel like any Stephen King movie, they make way more gory and way more scary than it actually needs to be. So yes, there is a killer clown in this story, but I think the main themes of this novel are kind of young kids. It's a coming of age story, and so this group of friends, the Losers Club, they're just finding themselves in the world and going through their own struggles of the teenage years, and then it follows them through adulthood, and how those struggles they had in the teenage years kind of followed them through adulthood. And I mean, yes, the killer clown is the central premise of the story, but it is a lot more than that. And so I would definitely recommend just taking a stab at that. It is it is a commitment. I think this is the longest book I've ever read. It's right at like 1,200 pages, but it is worth reading if you liked the movie at all. I would definitely recommend that. Also talked about 11/22/63, another great novel by Stephen King. East of Eden, John Steinbeck. This is probably, I would say, this is definitely my top 3 favorite books of all time. The Stand is definitely up there. I don't know what the third one is. Probably 11/22/63. I don't know. I feel like that list changes. Like I'll read a book and be like, oh, that's the best book I've ever read, and then I'll read another book and I'm like, ah, that's a really good book too. And so the top three are very fluid. But anyways, this one I just got in the mail a couple days ago. It just came out, I think the 22nd, and it's Memorials by Richard Kismar or Chismar. I'm not sure. So I've read his. He wrote the Gwendy's Button Box trilogy. Him and Stephen King, actually. I think Stephen King had some part in that, and that trilogy was okay. Kind of cheesy at times, but it was a good. It was a quick. I think you could have condensed the three books into one longer novel and would have been fine, but it was okay. I have heard good things about this one though, and so I'm looking forward to that. Let's see. I also have, here's some more books we read in our book club. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Another great story about um, women in this dystopian society that are expected to have babies and be handmaids for the rich and elite, and women that cannot have children. And so it is a very it's kind of a political book, and especially with times today, there are a lot of parallels, and it's kind of scary. Um, like what could happen if certain things happen. But that's worth a read. The Catcher in the Rye is another classic. This was one of the first books that I read when I kind of started getting back into reading just 3 or 4 years ago. And so I think this book and The Shining by Stephen King were kind of the two that got me started, that made me fall in love with reading again, so to speak. And so this is just one of those classics that I think everyone should read. I've got Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut. If you've never read a Kurt Vonnegut book before, you need to read one of his books. He is an Indiana author. He's from Indianapolis, so he's a local guy to us. He's just an interesting. His, I don't know. You just need to check him out. I would say this is black humor. I think is what it's called. Yeah, black humor, satire. He's got some good books, and this one was really good. It's one of those ones that you read and you're like, what is going on? Like, what on earth? But it does make you think about um, just the political. You got to look back on the political climate at the time he was writing this, because he does have a lot of political parallels, and especially like current events that were happening during the time he wrote his books. And so you have to take some of that with a grain of salt. Also have The Parable of the Sower. This is another kind of dystopian fiction. I think it actually takes place in 2024. Yeah, July 2024. But she wrote this quite a while ago. When was this? 1993. And so I think I only got about halfway through this one and did not finish it, but it's one of those ones that I plan to come back to. I think I think we're all meant to read a certain books at certain times in our lives, and when I read this one, it just wasn't the right time, and so I am going to come back to this when it is my right time. But this was a very compelling story, and it's about this dystopian society, and this woman and her family getting through the challenges of that society. It does take place in California, I think. It was somewhere in the west coast of the United States. Um, Last but not least is our copy of The Hobbit, and this is one of my favorite books that we own. For one, I really like The Hobbit. It's one of those classic fantasy adventure stories. I think it's listed as a children's book, which I do read this to our boys when they are willing to sit down and listen to a longer story. But it is just like a fun read to get through. I just love that first line. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole, with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. So it's just one of those comforting reads. But there's also these pictures, like these little pictures sprinkled throughout here, which I think are really cool. And then there's also a lot of full page. Let me find a good full page picture. A lot of full page drawings. And so it was illustrated by Jemima Catlin, and it's got this really nice, I guess this would be canvas, this material. I don't know. It's a really neat copy of the book, and it's almost like a coffee table book. Like you could display this on your coffee table or on a prominent place in your household. So I like having these type of books around that are good content, but also look really nice. It was fairly cheap. So this is one of those books that we did buy brand new, obviously. Um, but I think we bought it from a local bookstore, and so at least we supported them. But I think something like this is something I'm willing to splurge on a little bit, just because I know we're going to keep this for a long time, and this is something I'm hoping that the boys will enjoy, like their dad reading to them while they're growing up, and then it's something that will last and you can pass down to them. And I like having stuff like that. So I think that's the highlights of our bookshelf. Um, Not sure if there's anything I missed. Just going through. Yeah, I think that's about it. So hope this wasn't too boring for you. I hope you enjoyed our little bookshelf tour. If you are enjoying our content, I know we're trying to get, we've just been very busy. I'm filming this at like 11 o'clock at night when both the boys and Sarah sleep. And so it's kind of the quiet time of the house because we just get so hectic during the day. But we're trying to get some more content of just gardening and general homesteading type of stuff, like making kombucha or making yogurt. We're still making yogurt every week, making granola every week, kombucha, sauerkraut, doing a lot of fermentation. I'd like to make another kombucha video where I just sit down and explain in a little more detail the process of brewing kombucha. And so that's probably on the plate here coming soon. Probably the same thing with like probiotics in general. And I'll probably give that one to Sarah. I think she's really good about explaining probiotics and how that works with your gut health and your gut microbiome, and um, where we get those probiotics, which is primarily our yogurt, kombucha, sauerkraut, and our other fermented foods. And so looking forward to that. I know Sarah wanted to do some stuff on like postpartum care as well as like just general maternity care and maternal care. Um, so that is something she's passionate about, and she's looking forward to doing some more content like that. So yeah, kind of just a little bit of a hodgepodge, but we are aspiring to be um, homesteaders, I guess is the term. But we both really love to read, and so I like throwing in these little book videos every once in a while too. So hope you like that. If not, let me know. Not sure what I'm going to change, but I appreciate any feedback. And again, like and subscribe if I'd appreciate that as well. And hope you guys have a great week.